Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Honest Youth Pastor YouTube channel, the channel that helps believers use biblical discernment in all aspects of life. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a post that was over on Instagram the other day. Very interesting topic. I think you're going to get a lot out of it. And it's about pastors versus influencers on the internet, essentially. And I think there's a lot that could be said in this conversation, and we're going to try to pack it all into an hour. So let me go over and introduce everybody we have tonight. All right, so tonight we have Kiefer. He is actually the author of this post. We've brought back, if you guys were here not too long ago, Jason. He was on a previous live as well. He's here. And then we have the old reliable Matt and Josh over here with us again this evening. All right, fellas. Thanks for joining us tonight. How everybody doing? Everybody's good?
Outstanding.
Yeah. So, guys, what you did not see is that we basically had a little bit of a comic book fan pre-show, so you all missed that. But if you like that stuff, Kiefer and Jason, they're on it, guys. So you can hit them up, follow them on social media, all that. We'll talk about that later. But let's hop in because we do just have an hour tonight. Kiefer, I want to jump over to your post. We're going to be looking at it. Now, you can find this on Nerdy Theologians on Instagram. Are you anywhere else, Kiefer, or is that your main kind of thing?
Yes, mostly there, and then I'm on Twitter as well, which is just Keach Navy, Keach Navy, Navey, just one word.
Gotcha. Okay,
but
so
what we're nerdy.
Okay, so we're going to read through this post. This was a little outside of your normal posting, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit. But I want to read through this so you guys kind of get the idea here. He says this, here's a super hot take. Theological influencers and social media have actually been devastating to the church. What I mean is, instead of turning to your local pastor, it seems many Christians have begun turning to their favorite internet theologians. Folks will literally say, oh, I wish our pastor was more like Jeff Durbin, or I wish our church was more like Doug Wilson. I'm going to pause. Doug Wilson comes up a lot on these live streams. I'm not sure why that is, but anyway, here we go. And he keeps going, and it's literally breaking the 10th commandment. Instead of going to our local pastor, people will go to YouTube or Instagram Reels for input on doctrine and practice. That's why your doctrine is inconsistent, unhelpful, and probably divisive, at least socially at best. It's obviously beneficial to read widely, but social media has sold a lie that you can be personally shepherded by 10 or more different pastors. Between podcasts, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter, people join 100 churches, and rather than being shepherded by their local pastor, they're coached by men who do not even know they exist. No, podcasts, YouTube, and Twitter aren't sinful. Yes, they can be helpful. There's obviously a great benefit from listening to the great men God has given the church. All right, Kiefer, I don't even know how I came across that. I just know that I was going through my stories, and then I popped up on that first slide. I was like, ooh, this is nice. Ooh, this is getting better. And then I got like 4 in, and I was like, this is spicy. What is going on? I was like, all right, we're going to have to share this thing. So let me know real quick as we kind of get into this. What was the overall like reaction to that as far as positive, negatives? Kind of what kind of feedback did you get from that?
So I got a very small percentage of, I got a lot of affirming things saying like, yes, this is great. But I also got a ton of negative messages, about, basically that local pastors were inaccessible, that they were unavailable, and communication is virtually non-existent. They see him on Sundays, and that's pretty much it. That was the general, like if there's a motif, that would be it. That was the general motif, and there was some comments on it and whatnot about it. Like, yeah, so.
Gotcha. Okay. So I guess that's a good kicking off point there, right? Because I read through some of the comments on this post. So let's kind of address that, because that's what I sort of saw was that like, yeah, but my pastor doesn't know the answer, or he's not accessible, or this kind of in that same line of, yeah, but these guys know more. So let's go ahead. I guess let's go around here. Does anybody have any thoughts right off the bat before? Okay, Jason, I knew he was out here. Yep.
I got notes, bro. I'm ready for this. Okay, so first of all, like I literally text my pastor before we got on this, just to do so I can show and prove. You should be able to communicate with your pastor, and not saying that you need to be able to text them, but I talk to my pastor pretty regularly. I think these people make a very valid point that their pastors might be inaccessible. They go to a multi-site with 9 campuses. Their pastor's a hologram on a screen and all that kind of stuff. I agree. I think that, and he's inaccessible, Saturday through Monday and whatnot. I totally get it. That's why you should go find a real church. I don't think that qualifies as a real church. I'm sorry. And I'll use an example here in Atlanta. We have North Point Church. I'm sorry. Multi-site pastoring doesn't work. It doesn't work. And there's too much involved in the care of Matt, the care of Josh, the care of Jay Witt, and such like that, to make sure that you're growing and being discipled and such like that, to trust that to a screen. Sadly, a lot of these people that are getting their shepherding, I'm using it in a very loose sense, from a screen, they know that they're lacking something. I know I'm not praying enough. I know I'm not Bible memorizing, or I know I'm yelling at my kids and whatnot. And, Pastor Matt or Pastor Josh, they're inaccessible. So I'm going to go online, and Kiefer gives me some knowledge. Honest youth pastors dropping knowledge on me. Okay. And they're helping me. These people know they got a problem. And the problem, and I think the main problem, is they're not in a healthy church. Your pastor. Now there should be a plurality of leaders within the church. So it shouldn't just be the pastor. It can be associate pastor, assistant pastor, deacons, and elders. I'm a deacon in my church, so I'm fine with answering questions. And my pastor has given me people's questions to answer and say, hey, Jason, I want to see what you say about this. Tell me what you think about it. Before you call them, let me hear your answer. And we go like that. So, and he's like, that was killer. That was great. Excellent job. So there should be a plurality of persons there to help. And I think these people, your post, Kiefer, shows that there is a lack of that. And I think people should start looking for better church environments.
Yeah. And real quick, I did skip over this. So Kiefer, did this come from something specific that kind of spurred this on? I know most of the stuff that I post, it's always something going on in my life. So surely this didn't come out of nowhere. So like what kind of spurred this a little bit?
It's something, well, honestly, I think it's existed before, but I do think the past 2 years have made it worse. That folks have moved more online, and folks, and specifically theological influencers as well, have taken advantage of the uptick in social media usage. So I think it comes from there. But if I'm honest, yeah, I mean, there is a specific thing, especially, as we get around the holidays, it seems like there's a lot of influencers and theological influencers who have various opinions on whether you should celebrate a holiday or not. And it's just kind of like, why are we worried about this right now? Like, this should be something that you discuss with your local pastor. Like, if you have a conviction about something, you should be talking to your local pastor about it, not DMing a person who doesn't know you, doesn't know your context, doesn't know your life, or worse, not even DMing that person, just taking their information from them as gospel and just be like, this is who I am now. Like, this is just my life now. And this is what I believe, and I got it in 60 seconds. And it's like, you about to derail your entire Christmas tradition because you saw 60 seconds of a theological influencer giving you a hot take with good lighting, decent camera work, and a microphone.
Yeah.
So, and it's not an isolated incident. It's just perpetually grown and grown and grown and grown. And particularly the other day that kind of spoiled something over. And I felt like I kind of had to say something about it.
Good deal. Well, I know, for example, and Matt, I'm going to pivot to you here in a minute, so just be prepped. But I know, like, Matt does a lot of the emails and stuff for us in regards to when people send in questions like that. And I'm sure, I mean, I'm going to ask you here in a minute, but I know even when I used to do the DMs a bunch, that slowed down a lot in these sort of questions now, but there was a lot of stuff that people would ask and DM, and I have to be like, just ask your local pastor. Like, why is this question coming to me? And Matt, like, I know, like I said, you handle a lot of the emails, things like that. Do you still sort of see that sort of stuff? I mean, in our platform.
Yeah, we do get that a lot. And the way that I try to handle it is I try to give very light information to a certain extent, but I do provide the disclaimer that I can't really give you specific, direct guidance in this situation. Here are a couple of things that you could possibly do, and usually those are to seek care or counsel or advice from your local church and local elders, local pastors, and then of course all of the the good be in the word and prayer, etc., etc. But there are a lot of people out there who are seeking these very deep answers and easy guides, and they're looking for someone to tell them what to do, and I'm not the person to be doing that. I wish that I could, but I would just say that I lack the personal wisdom in a lot of these situations. So where if I was facing the same thing, I would be trying to figure out what in the world am I going to do. But then beyond that, I don't have access to your context, to your culture, to your lived daily life, all of those things. So that's the way I try to provide options and avenues and more redirecting back to where they should be looking.
Yeah. Well, and there was I was just thinking of it when we were talking here in the last couple minutes, where there was a quote, I think it was Vodi Bakum, that was said at one time, where people would like email him. He's like, well, what's your opinion on this? Because my pastor said this. And he's like, why are you trying to find information to contradict what your pastor's saying from me, which I'm not even your pastor? So real quick, before we I think there's a really good slide here I really want to get into, but Josh, did you have any input or any questions for Kiefer before we move on to that?
No input or questions. I related everything on the slides quite a bit. I agree with all of it, and especially what Jason said as well. I mean, I've heard some of those same things from people in our church. I attend the church that's got 700 people attending on a Sunday, so we're not multi-campus, but 2 services and that many human beings, and even having 6 pastors and 12 elders, it's still taxing on them, but they do get back to people. And even to the one slide where it said, I wish my pastor was more like whomever. I've sat down and had breakfast with my pastor and heard that from him, and how hurtful that was on him, where people are like, why aren't you like Doug Wilson during the pandemic? Right? Like that was a big deal. Like that really got on him. And he was even expressing, he took some issue with MacArthur's stance on stuff, which says a lot because he went to master's seminary. Right, like he and my senior pastor, he pastored under MacArthur, and here they are, in this world now where their local pastors trying to do their best, and guys with national platforms are saying X, Y, and Z, and that's contradicting what they're saying, and it's putting them in a tough spot as pastors, and that's really rough. There's a local pastor just out there, working overtime trying to pastor the Lord's church. That's tough, man.
Yeah. Well, and that comparative stuff, in case you guys are watching and, you're not a pastor or you're not that close to your pastor, like pastors do that to themselves. You don't need to do that to them. Like there's already this, am I doing this well enough? They don't need you telling them that as well. The next thing on the slides that I think you really, at least that I see, Kiefer, that you touched on and really kind of pushed the nerve on, was the slide that said, that's probably why your doctrine is inconsistent, unhelpful, and probably divisive. Because what I do see is people, and this was me. I mean, even shortly after college, just being like, I mean, I've told the story a number of times, but it's a matter of like, I grew up with no real solid theological underpinning before college. And then in like the first couple years, I heard about Mark Driscoll and like Matt Chandler and John Piper. And I was like, hey, this is awesome. And then I latched onto that because that was the only solid thing I'd ever seen. And there for a minute, I thought, I was like, oh, well, I know what it means to be reformed, which I had no clue. I was just like, oh, this is what it looks like, even though those three guys are different in a lot of ways, clearly.
A lot of ways, yeah.
Yeah, and so you latch on and you're very inconsistent in what you believe. So when you are asked, you're just like, well, I believe this. But when it's pressed, you don't really, you're just regurgitating things. And is that sort of where that came from, maybe? I mean, I know you do a ton, in case nobody knows about his page, you do a ton of reading, book review, like that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you see that a lot? I mean, in regards to people you talk to or you interact with maybe online or through your page or in real life, this inconsistency?
Yes, I see it. And again, I think it kind of comes back to things are so bite-sized. And so that's another comment that we got was people asking like, well, what about books? This is the same as reading widely or something. It's like, it's not really the same as reading widely. And we're, somebody commented and I said, we're literally a book review page. And even at the end of the post, I tagged Banner of Truth and said that everyone should read The Reformed Pastor by Baxter, who was trashed on some things, but really good on pastoral ministry and like really, really should be read by everyone, including dads, which I can kind of get to a little bit more. But that is something that I do see because it's not the same as reading widely. It's almost like following a cult of personality in a way. So you'll have like Doug Wilson's political theology and Jeff Durbin's apologetic method and MacArthur's expositional preaching and like all of these things. And then and you end up knowing a little bit about a lot of things that aren't very helpful. And it's detrimental. Number one, it's detrimental to the church because it's detrimental to fathers and it's detrimental to families. So like the main solution to this is just pure expositional preaching, like sitting under expositional preaching week in, week out, going through entire books of the Bible. You will learn to have a fully developed faith if you sit under expositional preaching that goes through books of the Bible. You will not get it in 60 seconds, but you will get it over 60 months, right? Amen. So it starts there. But again, things have to be so microwaved and we just want answer. Sorry.
He's gonna write that down. I'm gonna tweet it out.
Yeah, about the you can't get it in 60 seconds, but 60 months. Yeah.
I mean that's the and I see that and people don't like that. And for those instances, your pastor should be available. Like your pastor should be available to take care of you and to answer your questions. And if he can't answer it on the fly, he should be able to get back to you. And he should be, not necessarily should be prepared for every single nuanced question to answer it on the fly to its full extent, but he should be at least accessible in the first place. So I think it starts from the pulpit there. And if fathers are consistently in church and fathers are consistently being mentored by the pastor and taking care of the pastor, then it'll affect the family. So, but like the negative of that are these fathers who are watching these Instagram reels, these quick snippets and taking in all these social media influencers. Well, one day he's going to be on this side of the coin. And then the next week he's going to be on this side of the coin, and his poor wife and children who have to listen to whatever mood he's in don't know what to believe. But if you sit and you're under expositional preaching, you adhere to a confession, you adhere to, the creeds and councils and confessions, and you have at least something consistent there, that's going to make you deeper, not even just knowledge wise, but just relationship wise with the Lord. Like, I think that's part of it too, is that our relationships with the Lord are fractured because we're not really learning anything. We're just kind of grabbing talking points.
Well, that's a whole that's a whole word right there. Holy cow! Good deal.
Pass the plate, man.
My goodness.
Pass the plate.
All right.
So I'm sorry to rant, but like I can kind of give a little bit of an example. So like, not me. I just joined. We've been at our church for 5 years. But our pastor takes this approach of like Baxter, to where he meets with everybody in the church. That's partially why I've been brought on to staff, is so that I can help meet with everybody in the church. So every man in our church gets met with, hopefully at the least once a month, Lord willing, because the church had many issues many years ago. But when they switched to this model where they were focusing on training and mentoring and discipling the men, most of the church's main problems went away. Obviously there's residual sin and there's still issues, but by men leading their family. So like, one thing, if you follow my page, when dads message me or I review like a pastoral ministry book, I recommend it for dads. Dads should be reading The Reformed Pastor. Dads should be reading The Heart is the Target. Dad should be reading The Care of Souls by Sink Bell. Like, dads should be reading pastoral ministry books, because dads are the shepherds of their house, right?
Amen.
So I think if you really want to reverse all this and fix all this, it starts with the pulpit, and then the pastor getting out of the pulpit and being accessible to the people.
Good deal.
Sorry, I can get off my soapbox. My bad.
No, you're good.
Well, no,
somebody's calling in to donate. They're like, hey, I don't know what that ring was, but they're like, let's get this going.
Was that a landline? Was that a landline I heard?
I'm not sure.
I had the landline ring, man. Don't be hating on me. I got the landline ring, man. Come on.
So
that was good.
So let's pivot, because there's 2 points there I really, really want to talk about. The first one, I want to talk about cult of personality, because I think we can get through that one pretty quick. And the second one, really want to touch on passing on that theological knowledge that you're talking about, because like you said, I think that's 100%. If you can get that going in the way you described, I think so for example, my friend Rob, his church, they have it to where like they have people they can call up if somebody's got car trouble, they got a bathroom that needs fixed. I mean, whatever the problem is, there's men in the church that are there to do that, or to teach, or to help. So that whole thing, and he says basically the same thing you did in regards to like, it just makes the community richer and better to have that. So let's talk about Colt's personality really quick, because we still got a lot of time, so we got a lot we can move through here. So Jason, I know a lot on your channel, you cover a lot of cultural things, a lot of sort of along this line. What do you have to say about cult personality as far as what you've seen and what you've reviewed and stuff like that?
So yeah, I think Kiefer just really laid it out fantastic. A lot of the time people want to, they chase after people that they enjoy hearing. They like their style, they like their charisma, whatever it is, they kind of like them. I have to admit, I came out of purpose-driven church, and I was brought out of purpose-driven church through sermon jams. I mean, by God's grace, that's my first introduction to Reformed theology, was sermon jams and Paul Washer. Now I don't listen to Paul Washer much at all now. However, he did help me, by God's grace, help me to come out of purpose-driven and start looking at other, like, wait, there is other theology besides what we've been. So I totally understand the kind of picking and choosing. You know, I see that so much in so many areas of life. And you mentioned earlier how people just regurgitate what they've heard, and addressing critical race theory and social justice. You hear it all the time. People just say things like, that's not true, right? Especially, we just had a pretty nice runoff here in Georgia, and we have we had midterms in Georgia, and we got the runoffs that are finishing up next week. And some of the things you hear, you're like, you do realize that you could Google search that's not true, right? But you're just saying it. You're literally just parroting what your favorite CNN commentator, your favorite sadly pastor, or whatever is saying, and people are just doing that with no research and such. To the point that Kiefer made, I think is also really hurtful for the church, because when I'm doing that, I'm listening to MacArthur all the time. I'm expecting my pastor Joel to sound like MacArthur. Well, when he gets into John, he might not preach like MacArthur. So I already got this conflict going on in my soul, my mind, over who preached better over this and such. And it's insane. So I think the cult of personality, we see it all over the place. And as you said, Kiefer, we have to be on guard. And I think that was an excellent point.
Yeah, I remember back in the, again, John Parper, Mark Driscoll, Matt Chandler days, I remember anytime I'd tune into the Village Church, if Matt Chandler wasn't preaching, I'm like, I don't need to listen to this, and just click off.
There you
and
go.
it really, I remember one day that clicked. It was just like, what am I doing? Like, this is not even, this isn't fruitful if I'm just here for this dude to listen to this guy. Yeah, right. It wasn't great at all. That was a very humbling moment for me. So, Josh, what do you have, cult of personality? Is there a favorite pastor that you used to have that you were like, that dude, or no? Or what have you seen, I guess, through other people?
Yeah, and so it's a little more personal for me. It's an old pastor of mine. So, and you've heard him mentioned by Ty when Ty was on the show. He mentored my buddy Elijah, right? So this guy Coleen, he was a professor of all of ours in college, and then I had him as a pastor for a couple of years when I first got back from Iraq. We were first married, and those were some real pivotal years. It was about a year and a half, 2 years that he was my pastor. And he's that guy, as opposed to online personalities, that everything kind of goes through the lens of what would Coleen say or think, and that's good and bad in it to a degree, right? Because I can't judge the world by Coleen. I just can't do that. He was an imperfect man, and I would tend to put him on a pedestal over anyone else, even my current pastor. And I can't do that either. I can't judge my current pastor Spencer by Coleen, right? That's not fair to either one of them. So that hits home with me at a very personal level of having this guy that I was really close to and I learned a lot from, and wanting to judge everyone based on him. But he wasn't gifted the ways that Spencer's gifted, the way that, Darren, one of our other pastors is gifted, right? They all have different giftings. And the fact of the matter is, Coleen's home of the Lord, and these guys are here pastoring me and my kids and loving my children, And that's something that it took me, a long time to figure out personally and understand, that I was doing that. And I still have that tendency of just kind of like, well, I wonder what Coleen would think. It's one thing to do that and think, how would he approach the text? It's another to say Spencer should do the same thing.
Yeah,
that's not accurate.
Yeah,
either,
well,
right?
and I think it's a good point that, like, lots of times we can look at people like, MacArthur, Wilson, whoever, and be like, oh, my pastor needs to be there. But the truth is, especially if you've been at a small church in which a pastor's been there 50, 60 plus years and retires, that new dude coming in, that's usually pretty rough for him, for the same reason. But I think it's one of those things that we really have to recognize in our own minds. This, obviously, it's on like this big mega church scale because of how we have access to everything now. But it's also really much in a local thing. Matt, I know people idolize you all the time. How do you make sure people don't make a cult of personality around you? I just butchered the whole thing there because I couldn't talk.
But the joke was good.
Yeah, thank you.
I just invite them to come spend about 24 hours with me, and it will traumatize them so badly that they will never make that mistake again.
Gotcha. Well, there you go. Just come do ministry, and you'll never ever look at me the same way. Yeah. So on that, I do want to pivot real quick, Matt, to you for this question as well, as far as, because I know you do a lot of teaching and a lot of stuff like this. So pivoting from the cult of personality, which I think we all really, really have to recognize that we all have the tendency to bend toward, whether it be local or big. As far as this, what Kiefer's mentioned, as far as making sure the pastors disseminate, theological information well, training the men in the church well, so they can lead their families well. I know you just got done doing a lot of miniature teaching, through some courses. What do you think, just in your experience and in your training, that you think is the best way that you've seen maybe to do that well? Like if there's a pastor watching right now, rewatching later, and they go I understand what you guys are saying, but like I don't have the time for that. I don't even know how to do that efficiently. Like, what advice would you have for him? I know that because you've just recently come off from doing this. So what would you tell that guy?
Hello.
So I would begin by saying that it is definitely a lifetime discipleship process, both in the church under pastoral leadership, both in your house as a leader, and both in your personal devotions with God. And that many of the problems that we face are not quick, easy solutions that we are searching for, because we are in a day and age where we have such instant resolution to the problems that we face. And so we like that, and we get used to that, and we want that in every area of life. And so we want solutions to the problems rather than personal, slow, deep transformation. and
Right.
discipleship process. And that doesn't just come from one area or one person or one program or one one thing that you adhere yourself to, but it is a very holistic lifetime application and commitment. And it's more a matter of, I guess, who you are becoming, and specifically, being transformed into the image of God's Son, and that there are lots of good resources out there. Because I think that the point that Kiefer was trying to drive home with this post is not necessarily, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, is not necessarily disregarding all of the good, deep, formational, time tested, dependable resources that are available to God's people in God's church, but it's rather trying to steer people away from seeking either primary central care, leading, guidance, and discipleship from these personality names, or trying to distance ourselves from finding those quick fixes. Am I right in what I'm getting from what you said?
Me?
Yeah.
Me
You.
specifically?
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just want to make sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a long-term thing, and it's gonna take time, and I think it comes with the patience. So as far as like the processing the information, right? I think the easiest way to do that. Well, I think the best way to. Well, hang on. Let me back up here.
It's okay.
As far as like the sanctification, again, your point, being conformed into the image of the Son, progressive sanctification, and that continuing on, is not a quick fix. We look for quick fixes, and we want quick fixes, but it's just not one of those things. Yes, that's kind of what I was driving home. Yes.
Gotcha. So I want to go around. So I'm going to go to you, Jason, then Josh, and then Kiefer. I want to end up with you because I want to kind of have you kind of walk us through the steps and the reasons you guys started doing the things you are doing. But what I want to ask you guys as we get around to Kiefer to get to that point, it's like, what do you do in your local church? Because there's a lot of different sizes of churches here represented. Beforehand, we were talking about even denominationally. There's a lot of different denominations here. Kind of how your church sets up what you do in a way in order to care for the whole congregation, in order to make sure that cult of personality maybe doesn't develop, but it actually, the pastors that you have or the deacons that you have are resources for your people. I know one of the things, I'll just start off, one of the things we do is my pastor is very specific to make sure he's not the only one preaching every Sunday. He wants to make sure that, because we have 3 retired pastors in our church, along with just pastors that are active in our church. And he wants to make sure that, all of us have different gifts as far as like how we speak and how what we draw out in that. And he's very good about ensuring that, like, hey, my way of doing this is not the only, the way I approach this is going to be different than how Josh, our youth pastor's name is Josh, or how Michael approaches it. And like, so it's a matter of like whoever's up there. The idea is that like, let's utilize these guys' gifts so that, maybe you connect a little bit better with how they approach that passage or their personality. And he makes sure that, he's not like the guy, like you, if you have anything, come to me. Like there's all these other pastors and these other deacons that, well, we don't call them deacons, but board members that you can approach that you can work through this with and have training for. Jason, how do you guys break that down and take care of that at your local church? You said you were a deacon.
Yep. Okay. So first of all, I like that idea that the pastor sits down and meets with everybody. My pastor Joel and our associate pastor Danny try to meet with everybody who visits Smyrna Presbyterian. So if you visit, you're going to get a nice card written to you and an invitation to go out and have coffee. And they do a pretty good job of that. So that's one way of connecting with and helping people feel acclimated in. But of course, our inquirers class, which is called members class in other churches, but all of our deacons and elders are responsible for a small group of people to stay in contact with, to make sure if they have any physical needs, they're addressed. If there's something the group can do to help out with the physical need, or if it's something that we need to bring to the diaconate or the session. And then, of course, spiritual needs we're praying for, praying with, and such like that. There's men's ministry that meets once a month, women's ministry that does that as well. We have a family dinner every Wednesday, and once a month we have we have family dinner and prayer every Wednesday night, and then once a month we have a whole church-wide luncheon after church. So those are just some of the ways that we do at Smyrna Press to try to stay connected and give people a multitude of different people that they can connect with, so they don't have to feel like I go to this church and I don't know anybody. Because at the end of the day, that's going to be what causes people to run to YouTube and whatnot. So that's what we do.
Yeah, feeling disconnected for sure. Yeah. Josh, what do you? I know you said your church was, quite. I mean, it'd be for my area. 700 is pretty big. So what do you guys do?
Yeah, I mean, it's technically a mega church, right? I mean, the average congregational size is not that big. So the I guess you could call it the broad scale organization of it is we have an elder board and deacons, and then there are adult Bible fellowships that they encourage everyone to go to, right? Members or even visitors, try to plug into that ABF for short, not the shipping company, right? It's adult Bible fellowship. It's a fancy way of saying Sunday school. That's what I grew up with, but I don't know. Can't say Sunday school anymore. So, anyways, plug into that.
Sunday school.
It's not cool. It's not
I
cool.
know that's what I'm saying.
Oh,
it's not provocative.
I don't care what anybody say.
It's funny. They
I'm
have a
cool.
whole
I love
thing
Sunday
behind
school.
it. Like, well, Sunday school, that's more kiddish and childish. We wanted something that, adults feel like, this is for us. And it's an emphasis on Bible and fellowship. I don't know. They're more Baptist than they realize because there's, meanings behind every acronym. It's kind of funny to me. But anyways, so we have that ABF structure, and then within the ABF, then there are ABF leaders, right, who partner alongside, a couple of deacons, pastors. There should be at least two elders in every ABF or something like that. And then there are ABF leaders that lead the class with the church leadership, and then they have a leadership team that will then form small groups, right? So you kind of see in this hierarchy, right, that they're building in the church from the top down to try to make sure that they're getting into all of those families. So the ABFs, they're all a little bit different. They kind of follow the personality of whatever pastor or elder is leading it. So they're all a little bit different. And that's kind of neat because it lends itself to people finding a place where they fit in terms of either age or where they're at in life, stuff like that. Or if they jive with one pastor over another just for personality reasons. And then from there, not all of the ABFs, I don't think necessarily do small groups, or they just do them in different ways. So it's kind of neat. Like, you do have the ability to plug in somewhere and you're going to fit in somewhere. But it is very much pushed and encouraged, be a member. Like, don't just come and attend, be a member, come into covenant relationship and fellowship with us, plug into an ABF, be a part of a small group and attend that. And then that's where the real ministry happens. And then from there, those small groups, the leaders and ABF leaders, they all have meetings and they discuss what's going on in their groups and in the larger ABF, the health of it, who is struggling with what, how can we help what families. And that also then works its way back up to the leadership so that the pastors have an overall knowledge of how all of those people are doing.
Gotcha. So, Kiefer, one of the things that I really liked, or at least what I was hearing with what you were saying, especially with how you kind of laid out what it looked like, was it was, I guess, familial, family sort of vibe that I got from what you were talking about, in a sense of like, if I were to go there, it's like automatically not like, this is going to sound, it's not like structure corporate. It's very much like, hey, come and be a part of this kind of community that we have. So first of all, I'm assuming that's sort of the intent behind it anyway, but were you there like before he started doing this, or was this something that you guys kind of walked into and this was already going on?
This is how things have been done for like over a decade.
Okay.
And we've only been at the church for about 5 years. Yeah, and God has been really kind, and and it's very much so. Not to one up Jason by any means, but we do a lunch every week So after
man.
service every Sunday, and we're in North Carolina, so it's a lot of brisket, a lot of barbecue,
Beautiful.
I'm moving to North
a lot
Carolina.
of great stuff.
I'm on my way.
Oh yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's awesome.
Sounds like you've gained
But
another
anyway,
member.
so but
No, we're on our way.
But yeah, it's very much, and we have a lot of families, and it's very much that kind of thing. We and like even in our own experience, integrated into the church and joined the church so easily. And I mean, over the past 2 years, the church has nearly doubled in size. And it's just been very radical, and that's kind of how we've gotten to the position that we're in now, with bringing me on to help do that, so that we could faithfully meet everyone, or I guess that was the end of the sentence, to faithfully meet everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it. I love it.
So one of the things that I find really interesting here, and after I say that, I mean, we'll kind of just go in, because I'm sure you guys maybe have some questions for him, maybe some things we haven't covered yet, before because I have like a closing thing I want to get to for sure, but I want to give you guys time to ask him something maybe about this post that I haven't touched on. But so Kiefer, you were mentioning earlier, like with the pastor doing, with sort of saying, okay, this is the local church, this is the church you're a part of, not that they don't get resources elsewhere, but like, hey, if you have a question, we have people here that are knowledgeable, that are resourceful, that you like, that are here to help you to come to. You mentioned that since that process that has been done, as far as the pastors, mentoring or teaching the fathers, and the fathers doing so with their families, you said a lot of the problems have gone away. Is there any, like, I'm interested in what you mean. Like, is there, obviously, I don't know if you want to get into a ton of detail, but like, what have you seen, like the net benefit of things that maybe other churches or other, Christians like, man, this is never going to go away. This problem just keeps persisting in the church or in my life. What, like, when you said that, is there something you had in mind specifically that you're like, man, if we hadn't done this thing would still be going on, or this problem might still be persisting?
Oh, good question.
Sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, there's there's tracks that we make, or specifically maybe the pastor who's meeting someone, he'll make a track to work through with someone. So say they struggle with pride or something, like, my problem is pride. Or this person that which we have 3 things. We have 3 questions that we ask every man when we meet them, which I can talk about more. But we're going to put them on a track to grow them from A to B, to kill this sin, to mortify the flesh by the Spirit's power, so that we can move on, so that we can, again, as Matt talked earlier about being more conformed into the image of the Son, so that there is Christ likeness that's going to be more and more developed, whether it be marital issues or financial issues, like financial irresponsibility, or anger issues, or prideful issues, or hateful issues, or something like that. It being dealt with quickly. Number one, that's the first thing, is not letting things like grow and tense up even more, but rather addressing the problem head on, and because that's what shepherds do, right? Like, that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to, that is the job, right? Is feeding and taking care and protecting individual sheep, right? And I think that's I think that's been lost. I think that's part of how we've gotten into the position that we're in now, is so many pastors now basically just wanted to be good enough to become the next conference speaker. So I told you I was going to be spicy.
There. No, I like it, because it's true. It's absolutely, yeah. No, it's absolutely true.
It's not like, the shepherds just did their shepherd thing. It's not like there was some big shepgon for them to all gather and talk about, how good they are at being shepherd, or, that I'll eventually be a good enough shepherd to go preach to the other shepherds, and we all just learn how to be better with sheep. It wasn't like that. The job is just, you feed and you take care of the sheep, and you protect them from wolves, and you have to know them, or else how are you going to know if one's missing? So that's kind of what it boils down to, in my opinion, and I think that you can make a biblical case for that. But the whole thing that I think has happened is that disconnect is the biggest issue, and what's driven everything is the biggest disconnect between the pastor and the people. Ultimately, does that answer the question, or did I get too sidetracked?
For sure. No, you're good. Go ahead, Jason.
I think so. Can I just say the church leaders and the people rather than the pastor? Because I think the pastor, I hate that bottleneck that, all roads lead to one person type of effect. And as long as the leaders in the church, whether it be the pastor, associate pastor, deacons and elders, however they structure it, that would be the only thing I would maybe just change. But I love everything else you said. Everything you said.
Gotcha. All right. So,
and I will say, like, sorry. Just all I was going to say is that I mentioned the 3 questions earlier. As far as like even just meeting with the people that we meet, the 3 questions are simple, which are just: are you taking advantage of the means of grace? Are you reading your Bible and praying? Are you leading your family in family worship? And are you pointing your family to the means of grace? It's like, are you reading the Bible and praying? Are you reading the Bible and praying as a family? And are you encouraging your family to read? And, if you have children who are old enough, are you staying on top of them about those things? Your wife, are you making sure your wife is spiritually taken care of? And then are you leading family worship? I mean, that's it. Like, those are the 3 simplest questions. And usually anything's going to come out of those. But I would also say those 3 questions could probably solve most of the problems that we've talked about tonight. It's like, if you're going to lead family worship, you're going to have to know your stuff. And if you're going to know your stuff, that means you're going to have to read and pray. Like, you can't, lead necessarily if you don't know what you're reading. But anyways.
No, for sure. So,
Good.
I got something, but I'm going to wait because I want to make sure you guys have a little bit of time here. Is there something that like has come up tonight or something you saw in Kiefer's post that you just wanted to ask him, or there's something that sort of things you wanted to say here that we haven't got to yet? Anybody have that?
I don't think so.
I would just ask, sorry. You first, Josh.
No, go ahead. No, I was just saying I didn't think I had anything.
Okay. I was just wondering if Kiefer could elaborate more for the benefit of our listeners on the difference between, we'll say, social media influencers in this immediate, instant, bite-sized, easy solution, one-liner world, and the effects of, we'll just say reading widely, whether that be commentaries, whether that be, theological reading, pastoral care, something practical, spiritual with the family, whatever it may be. Can you just elaborate on the differences between those?
Sure. So C.S. Lewis, in his foreword to On the Incarnation by Athanasius, he has like that legendary foreword, and he talks about the problem with new books. And he's like, new books, like, they're still like being tested, like they're still being, they're still running their kind of course, right? That's the benefit of reading widely and deeply, not just like contemporary wise, but reading like large, like reading through history, right? So there's a benefit through reading these folks that are not just contemporaries, but their stuff has been read and critiqued and read for 2,000 years. You take like the early church fathers or the medieval scholastics or the post-Reformation reformers. Like, these guys, like at least the post-Reformation reformers have been around for hundreds of years. Right. So the reading of there's a benefit of reading Matthew Henry or Matthew Poole or John Gill, just because like those 3 guys are radically different, but they're all from the same era, or roughly the same era, but there's a benefit to going that far back and then going back even further to Calvin and Luther and their commentaries, then going back even further, because it's a rich resource. There's pages, there's footnotes, there's primary and secondary materials that you can consult, and things like that. And I should say that your pastor is going to do that. Like your pastor's
Mm-hmm.
going to read widely and deeply, hopefully. So it's not like you're forbidden to listen to other voices or enjoy other voices. That's not at all what my point ever was. I'm not saying that your local church is the source of the information and the only place you should ever get your information. That's not what I'm saying, because your pastor is going to read, you know, he's going to do John, he's going to get 10 commentaries from 10 different guys from 10 different eras, and he's going to read widely, hopefully, and deeply, hopefully, so that he might best exegete the text so that Christ may be glorified, right? So that should be your ultimate end goal. Again, going back to what I said earlier, as fathers lead their families, that should be their goal. It's a deep, rich history that's been tested over time, again and again and again, right? Versus, you know, these new guys with new technology and new things that age terribly a lot of the time. That you know, it does. It just ages terribly, and then it's like, you know, but then it happened, and then they archive it or something. You know, maybe they change their views and they archive it. And that's one thing that I appreciate. I recently came across an article from Phil Johnson talking about an essay I read by Phil Johnson addressing the eternal sonship, and he talks about how MacArthur changed his stance and publicly changed his stance, and the essay that MacArthur wrote about changing his stance is still on the Grace to You website, right? So we still have these guys who will grow. MacArthur grows, or whatever you want to say. He grows and changes his mind on doctrine. That was in 1999, I believe, 98 when that happened. But that's the main benefit of reading deeper and wider and older versus just taking in new bite-sized clips that have no references, no footnotes. I wouldn't say no endnotes, because endnotes are trash, footnotes for life, but there's no footnotes. There's nothing that you can consult. There's nowhere you can look. You just kind of take it at their word. And going back to the cults of personality, it's like they say it so coolly and they say it so well that you don't feel like you need to. And maybe that's part of the problem, is you don't feel like you necessarily need to check the resources because this person's obviously done their homework. You're just assuming, but you really shouldn't. You know, you really shouldn't assume those things. But I'd say the large difference is that an Instagram clip hasn't been tested for years and years and years and years and years, right? But reading widely and deeply has. And it's also a proven method of being edifying and growing, right? You read deeply and widely, it gives you a better understanding.
Yeah. Well, and you say things with enough confidence. I mean, somebody's going to believe you regardless. So, all right. So Josh, you said you didn't have anything else. Jason, do you have anything here you want to end with talking to Kiefer, maybe something we didn't cover?
No, I thought this has been great. I appreciate you inviting me in. Now, I do have a thought, and Kiefer and I'm going to talk. I wonder if what we're seeing today is just an outcropping of like parachurch ministries that were really big in the 90s. And then before then was like conferences and big tent meetings and revivals. And ultimately it did take the focus off of the discipleship in the church. And I was just wondering if maybe that was, if what we're seeing today, you know, the Twitter influencers, the theological influencers, is just another iteration of that long line where some of those things should have been stopped a long time ago. But
Yes.
I'm just wondering if this is maybe just another outcropping of that. What do you think?
I mean, I can definitely foresee that. And I think and I think it comes down to, you know, there's a bunch of, especially men are very impressionable, and men want to be, you know, good men, and they think they see a cult of personality, they follow it. You know, a bunch of angry people moved from Seattle to Moscow like 10 years ago. So, but you know, people will follow various strong men who say things confidently. And I think it's been like that for years, or people are just attracted to great speakers and things like that. And then when there's folks who are traveling preachers, you know, as you said, like the tent revivals that are just springing up and don't really have any sort of authority over them, it can just fly, and that's how we end up kind of in here, where it's just like, people found their own denominations or start their own seminaries or start doing all of these things because they see a need, but really they just want to do things their way and don't want to have somebody bossing them around or something like that. But again, people just kind of follow strong voices in a way. And I think it's been going on for years and years and years, again, from conferences to whatever. And I think you have to be careful of that. And again, not that conferences are necessarily bad,
Right.
but if again, if that becomes your whole thing and you're just,
Well, yeah, and one of the underpinnings, I see through this whole conversation, I know we don't have a whole lot of time left, but one of the things that I think for the model you've definitely talked about, and everybody else has sort of hinted at as far as how our church is run specifically, is that there has to be an understanding of the importance of the local church and what that means to be under your shepherds, and what that looks like to have mentorship and discipleship and church discipline take place. And I know we don't have a ton of time to get into it here, but I mean, we get messages all the time of like, there's, either there's no good local churches in my area, or, all the pastors are mean. And I think all that means is, one, you haven't actually, almost always there's this misunderstanding about what local church is. So they'll be willing to move 4 states over to go to a church of a pastor they've heard before, but they won't be willing to stay where they're at, actually look for a faithful pastor, which I guarantee you is there. You're trying to compare him probably to somebody he's not, but he's faithfully leading the church. And then get involved in, a church much like what you've described, Kiefer, as far as like this, most men, if they don't understand, what the church is meant to be, or what mentorship looks like, or just have never had that model, the moment you bring up to them, hey, you have a pride issue and we want to work through that with you, are going to like just be defensive and run away. And I think that's the part of where like understanding what the local church is for is so important, because if you get that, if you understand that, whenever your pastor comes to you and says, hey, we've noticed this thing in you and we want to work with you and be the body around you. If you understand that, that's one of the biggest jobs of the local church, is to come alongside you and do that. You're going to be so much more susceptible and like willing to work through that for the betterment of yourself and your family and the glory of God, rather than being like, yeah, but this guy over here says all the stuff I like, and he'll never, like you said, you're pastored by 1,000 pastors and none of them know you, so there's no accountability, versus actually being in a local church, actually being under a shepherd, actually having, real discipleship and church discipline and all of those things, at your fingertips. So we have a lot of people that I think, and I see this at least in the comments and in the DMs a lot. You have a lot of people that say they want that, but when it's offered to them, they're like, I don't know. I don't know if I really want that. I'd rather, just listen to this guy online all the time. And I think we have a real issue with understanding the local church. And I think a lot of that comes from what you and Jason said. Like, you're so used to this big conference, big passion. Like, you grow up in youth group. You go to all these youth conferences, you go to Passion, you go to all these things, and these are the speakers. And sometimes the youth pastors are like, yeah, these are the people. Don't listen to me because they're not trained for it and they don't care. And this is obviously generalizations, but the idea is like, hey, this, look at this, read this person's book. And then they're just assuming after they leave, well, my pastor doesn't look like that, or my church doesn't do this. And then they have no real concept of what the local church is supposed to be and what it's supposed to look like. So any last thoughts here as we close up, guys? We'll kind of go around Matt, Jason, Josh, and then Kiefer will end with you since you are our guest tonight. Matt, do you have anything to end us with tonight? I was speaking in tongues there. I'm sorry. I was going a little Pentecostal on you.
We need a little interpretation.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I am Pentecostal, so
I got the interpretation.
My mind and my heart is clear, so we're good.
Good deal. Jason, any last words for the listeners?
Absolutely. Hey, I do have an interpretation of your tongue, by the way.
Oh, yes. Was it confusion? What was it?
Yeah, absolutely. Please make sure you like this video and please share it with somebody. That was it. And no, I'm with Matt. This was an excellent conversation. I'm looking forward to catching up with Kiefer after the fact. So thank you so much for having me.
Yep. Josh.
Yeah, I echo Jason. This was wildly encouraging to me, just hearing from some guys, in the same boat, right? Husbands, fathers, trying to lead their families, right? It was convicting. It was encouraging. Right? I need to go do more to lead my children and make sure that they're walking in the admonition of the Lord, right? I mean, that's a never-ending battle, especially as fathers and as men. So this conversation was great. Want to have more of it with all of you guys.
Good deal.
And that's not some trite cliche statement. Like, very seriously, I will be in touch with you guys to I don't know, have more better conversations. So it was good.
Awesome. Well, Kiefer, thank you, first of all, for your post.
Absolutely.
I think that I got feedback from it, just linking over to your stories. There were a lot of people that messaged me about how encouraging it was to them, and how there was a couple of people that were like, it was a little convicting. So, I mean, I think it did what you intended for it to do. You have any last words for people other than, I mean, obviously, I'm going to you guys, in the description after this, we are going to link to be able to follow him, the links that he gave you at the beginning as well, for sure. But what do you have, I mean, sort of as a closing statement here for maybe those that were encouraged by your post and maybe want to know more about you?
I mean, I think I just would encourage people to just talk to their pastor and get to know their pastor. And I would encourage pastors to get to know their people. Just all around. Pastors shouldn't be locked in the study. They should get out in the diners and the coffee shops and the people's homes and meet them and love on them and get to know them. Baxter has this really good quote about how how can you cure the people if you don't know what ails them? And I think that's a number of things. How can you preach against their sin if you don't know what it is? And so my encouragement would just for people to get to know their pastors, pray for their pastors, encourage their pastors, and then the other way around. Pastors, encourage your people, get to know your people, go to your people and tell them to come to you, to shake up whatever your calendar needs in order to get to know them. And that would be my main encouragement and kind of final thought for the evening.
Awesome. No, for sure. I think one of the things that I really appreciated that you said was shepherds should know their sheep, because if they don't know when one of them's gone missing. And that is 100%. That thing touched home really, really well.
Really
so guys, thank you for hanging out with us. You can check the description for these guys' social. I will get those in there as soon as possible. We appreciate you guys joining us, and I think that conversation was great. I think for pastors, it's a little convicting and also encouraging, and then hopefully for you guys that are watching, I would just encourage you, like he said, pray for your pastors, get to know your pastors. It's really easy to get distracted by all of the stuff on social media. In fact, Brandon's in the comments saying this discussion has convicted me to unfollow Honest Youth Pastor because he's not my pastor. So I'm totally cool with that. But just get to know your pastors, and for sure be praying for them because they have a very, very important job to do. So guys, thank you. Make sure you like the video, share the video, follow, all that cool stuff if you feel like it. We'll talk to you later.